For this episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with Joe Pulizzi, founder of The Tilt. He's the best-selling author of 7 books, including Content Inc. and Epic Content Marketing, which was named a must-read business book by Fortune magazine. Joe is best known for his work in content marketing, first using the term in 2001, then launching Content Marketing Institute and the Content Marketing World event. In 2014, he received the Lifetime Achievement Award by Content Council. He successfully exited CMI in 2016 and consequently wrote an award-winning mystery novel, The Will to Die. Stay tuned for my conversation with Joe, where he shares some practical advice for entrepreneurs and business leaders on how to run a content-driven marketing machine that acquires customers at scale.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey, Joe, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
This is awesome. I'm so happy to be here, Samuel. I appreciate the offer to be on your show.
Most certainly. Obviously, Joe, every entrepreneur has an interesting story of how they became an entrepreneur, going through, overcoming obstacles and starting their journey. Can you share with our audience a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey?
Well, yeah, I guess technically I've started 4 different companies. I got involved in publishing media, business to business side in 2000. And I always had this itch to start a business, but I didn't really know, who should I start it for, or what should it be, and whatever. And I was lucky enough to get into this industry that we called content marketing, which is basically, instead of advertising, we're going to create our own audiences. And I said, wow, this is going to be a fast moving industry. Everyone's going to need to have a content marketing program. We now can all create our content. What should the business be? And in 2006, I had this idea. Initially, it was called custompublishers.com. It was going to be matching site, sort of like the eHarmony for content marketing. So I was going to match up brands with agencies and journalists that could create content. We'd match them up. We'd be the middle entity, and it would be all work out. In 2007, I finally got the courage, launched the business. It was called not custompublishers.com. It was called Junta 42. I thought it was a great Web 2.0 name at the time. And so whatever, you could say what you want about that one. The problem is, and we can go through it if you want to, the financial model for Junta 42 is absolutely terrible. I targeted agencies. Agencies were the people that were going to buy this service, and agencies have no money to spend on marketing at all, as you know. And I'm like, well, that was a horrible decision to go after that. But luckily, while we were doing this, I created a blog called the Content Marketing Revolution, and I was starting to build an audience through that blog. And then, in 2009, I was thinking about, okay, maybe I should go find a job. This is not working, whatever. But said, no, I'm going to stick with this, and started to look at the feedback from my audience. And so instead of, I knew Junta 42 wasn't going to work. And they were saying, Joe, what about content marketing training? Joe, what about content marketing consulting? Joe, is there an event for content marketing? And I said, there's something here. Did the pivot to what became Content Marketing Institute in 2010. So basically took the blog and built that out, started to really work on audience building. And then Content Marketing Institute then launched Content Marketing World in 2011. That became the largest event for content marketing professionals. And that the business just took off in 2015. We sold the business, had a great exit, my wife and I. So we exited the business, and I stayed on until 2017. And then I was retired. I was basically, from 2018, 19 up to 20, I was just going to write fiction novels. I like mystery thrillers. I'm like, okay, I wrote one 2019, 2020. And then lo and behold, COVID happens again. One of my books catches a little bit on fire, Content Inc., which was for entrepreneurs on how to build this content first model. And I said, well, that was in 2015. Maybe I should write that, redo that book. I redid the book again. I went down the rabbit hole into what we call content entrepreneurs and help, content creators creating their own businesses. How do they do that? So wrote the book, went down Web 3 rabbit hole, created our own social token, created a new business called The Tilt, which we could talk about if you want to. So that was in 2021. And, here we are. I'm a year under my belt with this new business called The Tilt. And I didn't think I was going to get back in, but as you know, and you interview a lot of entrepreneurs, they just keep starting things, and I just keep starting a new thing. I saw an opportunity here for this industry around the creator economy, or this new fast growing business of content entrepreneurship, and here we are again. So that's sort of my 5 minutes of starting all these businesses, always on the content side, but now instead of content marketers and working with large businesses, we focus on working with small content creators.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that you've addressed, 2006, seven, it was definitely a bad time to start a
Yep.
business, right? Like it was downturn in economy and like early days of inbound marketing. I think HubSpot was coming into the picture, teaching about inbound methodology and inbound marketing, and it's definitely early days. And to go into a business where you're telling agencies to buy from me and I'm going to match you with content writers was definitely kind of premature for the market,
Yep.
and that's definitely what happened. It's kind of like the Friendster versus Facebook story too, right? Friendster was a great concept, but Facebook came in the right time when everybody had mobile devices or access to internet a lot faster.
Yeah,
And
and
there's a
by the
bunch of
way,
other.
yeah, in
Mhm.
2012, 13, 14, there were a number of companies that actually took that model and have done
And
very successfully
yeah,
with it. We just were
clear
very early
voice.
to that. But what I would say just about a bad time to start a business, at the time when you're going through it,
Hmm.
horrible time. But we probably wouldn't have had the opportunities to become Content Marketing Institute if it wasn't for 2008, 2009 happening. Because everyone that should have launched what became Content Marketing World, they were sort of battening down the hatches. We were going through the Great Recession. They weren't spending money on this new industry of content marketing. But here we were, we had budget on a shoestring. We were doing whatever we can, really tenacious about it. And we invested in it when a lot of other people should have. So, as you know, Intel started in a recession. I think it's
Hmm.
the greatest time to launch a business, even though it's terrible when you go through it. But once
Hmm.
you come out of that, you have a lot of momentum and a lot of people that maybe forgot about those issues while they were going through it. So there is an opportunity there.
Most certainly. And I think, like you said, I think Writer Access, I don't know, Writer's Access came in that same time,
Yep.
or, Clear Voice is
Contently
another
came
one.
around that time as
Contently.
well. Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
all of those models actually they're diversified into the content, right? They're not just writing anymore. They have videos and images and all sorts of
That's
other
right.
stuff there. So obviously, you shared your entrepreneurial journey. You've accomplished a lot in your career, right? You've written 6 books. You've probably spoken at thousands of stages. You created 2 events. I know you're hosting your big event for entrepreneur creators, right? That's a new one that you're starting. So you have accomplished a lot in your career, founded multiple companies. What's the one accomplishment that you're most proud of?
This is probably going, you know, first of all, making the leap. You have to talk about that because I basically knew for 10 years I was going to start a business, but there's never a right time. You think there's going to be a right time, but there never is. And you actually have to, take the leap. And if at the end of 2006, I kept talking about this over and over again. And my wife basically said, Joe, either do it or don't do it. Like, stop talking about it. And luckily she said that. And then I made a deal with her and I said, by the end of March 2007, I will have made a decision either way, and that was my last day at Pent Media, the company I worked for. And then
Mm-hmm.
April 2nd, 2007, we opened what ultimately became Jump to 42, what became Content Marketing Institute. So making that leap was probably the biggest thing from an accomplishment standpoint. And this is not really going to answer your question from an entrepreneurial standpoint, but writing my fiction book, my mystery thriller, The Will to Die, was probably the biggest accomplishment because it was so different than anything else I'd ever done before. And I didn't think I could do it. Like, I always thought I'd be successful in some way building a business, but I'm like, writing, I can write nonfiction books. As you said, I've written 6 of them. I'm very used to doing that, but the not fiction books, mysteries, are so different. I love reading them. I wanted to see if it could happen. My wife loves reading them. I wanted to write something that she would actually read. So probably actually finishing that one was what I would consider right up there with one of my big accomplishments.
It's crazy. The fiction writers, they just keep writing a lot of fiction, but as somebody who's writing nonfiction, it's a big challenge for you to come up with a fiction.
It's so weird. It's such a different process too. I have a very particular process for writing a nonfiction book. I do a blog to book strategy, or basically I write most of the chapters over a 6 to 9 month period of time. Those things become pieces of content. They become blogs, they become videos. And then I take all that information, put them into a book format. And I'm like, I've got 75% of a book done. Now I'm going to go finish that. I could not do that with the mystery thriller. I had to actually, every morning I had to get up and I had to spend an hour or 2 hours just writing. And it took weeks to get into writing shape, where I actually thought that there was a story to be told there.
So I think we alluded to this a little bit earlier. Like you said, the entrepreneurs has this itch and they never stop, and you've kind of almost exited and was taking a break. And then you say, hey, I think I got to get back in the game because there's some demand for my knowledge and my expertise. So what's the why? What keeps Joe going at it?
To be honest, so I could be an average fiction mystery thriller writer. I think that if I came out with a book every 6 to 9 months or a year, like you do, that it would please a lot of people. I would get a fan base around that, and I would entertain people for the time that it took for them to read the book. To be honest, I just don't think that I think I could be more helpful doing other things. So what do I know? I know how to build media companies. I know how to build audiences and then monetize those audiences, what we call the Content Inc. model. And it was tough for me because I didn't want to get back to full time, but I'm like, I can do more. I can help more people. And it's so different now when we're talking about content entrepreneurs, because these are individuals that you can affect immediately. You can give them one or two things that can take their business to the next level, because they're trying to support their families. They're trying to become financially independent. This is a whole different thing than selling it to a marketer inside of a large brand. So, which by the way, some of those decisions never ever get made. You can, as a consultant in many of those big brands, I could make a recommendation that I think is going to work for them, but they never implement it. That's most consulting, actually. But in this case, I can talk to an entrepreneur. I can give them some advice or some motivation or some encouragement that can get them to the next level. I've absolutely been there. I know what they're going through. And that was the decision to start the Tilt and to the new event, Creator Economy Expo in May. Those are the decisions we made because I think that's why I'm here. I have a little bit of expertise there. I've been through that journey multiple times. So there's a lot of people that need that help. And maybe the fastest growing business on the planet right now is around content creation. All different age groups saying, hey, I can create my own blog, my own podcast, my own YouTube series, Instagram, Twitch, whatever the case is. So they know how to do that. They can create content, but do they know the business of content? And do they know exit strategies around that? And do they know all the monetization forms? No, they probably don't. And that's where we can help.
Yeah, so that brings me up to that good question. You kind of give me a good segue. Basically, can you define what a content entrepreneur is, the way that you define it?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, everyone's a content creator. My mom's a content creator. She's creating content on Facebook. So I use that term content creator a lot because a lot of people in the industry use it. But really, when I say content creator, I mean content entrepreneur. I mean somebody that is creating content, not as a side gig, not as a hobby. This is full time for their business. They are building an audience. They want that audience to become loyal to them, trusting to them in some way. And once they do that over a long period of time of consistent delivery, they can monetize that in multiple ways and hopefully build at least enough revenue where they can support themselves and their family. And if they do it over a longer period of time, let's say 3 to 5 to 7 years, they could have a successful exit like we ended up doing with Content Marketing Institute. So it's somebody that is taking the business of content seriously and trying to figure out how this business works. Just like if you were in the restaurant business or the funeral home business or whatever business you're in, there's different aspects of that to help you become successful. The same thing goes for content creation. And that's what somebody striving to be successful in that area to me is a content entrepreneur.
So it brings me to a question about the personality of a person, right? Because when you're explaining the content entrepreneur, you're trying to build a brand around you as a person. So where's the fine balance between your personality versus like the brand itself? Because at the end of the day, Content Marketing Institute was your orange, outfit and coming on stage and all of that. But you were able to remove yourself and sell that as a business. How do you, properly structure that in that way though?
It's funny you say that. It was a very purposeful move and strategy away from that. So as you said, so 2010, 11, 12, maybe even into 13, when people saw Content Marketing Institute, they saw Joe Pulizzi. It was me with the orange suit up there on stage at Content Marketing World. I was blogging a lot. I was doing the podcast. I was doing a lot of those things. But one of my personal goals that I had since 2008 was to sell the business for enough money where we could have forever money. And I was like, okay, well, that's not going to happen if CMI is Joe. So I started to make very particular decisions of moving things away from me so it wouldn't always be Joe. So we got different writers involved, different people on the podcast. We had things that I wasn't great at doing or didn't want to do anymore. We were moving over. So by the time we ended up selling in 2016, I was, we had 28 or 29 different people doing different things. And then for the event, we'd have 50 to 60 different people doing things. So it wasn't just the Joe show. I wasn't writing all the time in the newsletter. We had a different people. So you have to make those decisions. Now we're launching over again with the Tilt, and a lot of it is Joe. But then there's going to be, as we go get more expertise involved, we got more instructors. It's not just Joe, it's other people, it's other experts, bring the community involved. So yes, can you leverage your personality and you as an influencer in the business? Absolutely. You should do that. If you can do it, wonderful. But at some point you have to know that depending on what your goals are, by the way, if your goals are, you just want to keep this thing going and it's a hobby and it's you, fine. You don't have to have any strategy to move forward away from that. But I don't want to always be doing the same thing. I want to, as you've seen by my story, I want to move on, get other people involved, build the community. So you have to set a strategy to do that.
Yeah, and I think what you defined, you mentioned this earlier with big enterprises, you can give all advice you want, but they don't take action on some of those advice. And most of the time, it is actually owning that content function, the subject matter expertise for that organization, and it needs to be somebody who's going to live with the organization for long enough, right? And to build that, and maybe like you said, maybe then you do bring additional subject matter expertise to kind of supplement the content machine that you need to create. So, what advice do you have for organizations, especially, it's not individual, person that's trying to build a brand, but actually an organization that really need to build a content machine?
Well, if you're the leader, if you have the vision, you want to have some say in what that content mission is, which you absolutely should. But does that mean that you should be the managing editor or the editor over that? Probably not. That's probably not. And my expertise doesn't lie there either. So in 2010, I've been from 2007 to 2009, I was creating almost all the content. But then I'm like, well, we really want to grow and we want to scale this thing, it can't just be you. So you have to set, okay, what is we call it a content mission statement. What is it? Who are we targeting? What are we delivering on a regular basis? What's the outcome for the audience? And then you start getting people involved that have that expertise that can fill that content gap or that content tilt, hopefully. So that's where we want to go with it. Every organization needs to do that. And I guess my advice for anybody listening to this that is trying to put something like this together is to less is more. You don't have to be everywhere your customers are at online. You don't have to do YouTube and Twitch and Instagram and TikTok and podcasts and blog. You don't have to do all of it. Do one or two things really well. If you do one or two things really well and build your audience there, it's plenty of time in the future to diversify. But most organizations, they diversify too quickly. You can't be jack of all trades, master of none. It absolutely does not work in content creation. You have to focus on building one or two remarkable things so you can build an audience that knows, likes, and trusts you.
Yeah, I think in your Content Inc. book, you talk about diversification much later in the process of, your steps. Obviously, you touched on the, basically, content creation, right? Like, I was listening as part of the preparation for this podcast. I was listening to some of your older talks, and I think you mentioned in some of them like Google Plus and also Periscope and some of those things. Those things are not even around, right? Like those things disappeared. So like building your business on one platform isn't always the good strategy, but you also don't want to spread yourself too thin across multiple platforms and you really don't have much traction whatsoever. So what's the fine balance on that diversification, especially in the early days, to make sure you're not spreading yourself too thin, but you still need to build
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
audience?
when you figure out what your content mission is, you go to the third step of the Content Inc. model is building the base.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where you really should pick up what's your home, what's your TV show, what's your movie, what's the place where the story is told, what's the place where you want to have the audience and the fans congregate. Does that become an email newsletter? Does it become a blog? Does it become a podcast? So those are things that you can keep for a long time. Now, the challenge with, you talk about diversification, if you say my home is going to be a Facebook group on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitch, there's nothing wrong with those things. But to your point, they may not last. And the other things, you have no control over those. We call those things rented land.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you, let's say you have 1 million subscribers on YouTube, well, that's wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't really do anything with that as a business because those 1 million subscribers aren't yours. They're
Mm-hmm.
YouTube's. You're sort of renting them as you go. Now, what are you going to do with them while you have it? So what I like to say is you want to move or diversify later as you build that base and take those subscribers and move those to something you can control. And that would be something like an email newsletter where you get opt-in permission to email somebody. So that's almost always your second or third place of diversification. So wherever you build your base, at some point, you're going to have to get control over your content business, and that's moving it to something like an email newsletter. So that would be my recommendation. One, and by the way, it's not only where your audience is at when you pick your base, but it's what you're good at. So if you're really good at a podcast or really good, let's say you're a really good writer, well, you're probably not going to do a YouTube video, right? It's probably going to be a blog or an email newsletter. So think about, or you have writing talent in your organization. So, or if you have somebody that's really good, like you are on a podcast or a video. So you might say, okay, we've got some talent there. We could do something. So you want to take those things into consideration. But at the end of the day, you've got to make sure you have something to show for it, because YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, they don't care about you, right? They care about their bottom line. And if their bottom line is going to be helped by cutting you off or not giving you access anymore or not giving you a share of revenue of your subscribers, whatever it is, you got to be prepared for that.
Yeah, even Joe Rogan don't have a lot of voice, it seems like, even with $100 million, contract under him. So yeah,
that's a really good point. I mean, Joe got his payday with 100 million with Spotify, but does Joe control that RSS feed now that Spotify bought it? No, probably not, right? Because he's getting content pulled up, right or wrong. I'm not making a statement about whether it's right or wrong, but he doesn't have a lot of control over the Joe Rogan Experience, that brand that he built. He made that decision, and that's okay. But if for some reason Spotify said, no, okay, Joe, we're done with you, we're going to take our 100 million back, then Joe would have a lot of options. He could publish anywhere. He could do whatever. He could build an email list. He could do a lot of things. So there's a lot of decisions that have to be made as a content creator. And you always want to keep in mind, yeah, your audience may be on those other platforms, but at the end of the day, you've got to make sure you have something to show for it.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you had to start all over again, he's starting from scratch. Even with the big following, he's still kind of starting from scratch too. So that takes his time to success probably much further down the road. One of the concepts that you teach in the Content Inc. book is this concept of content tilt, right? Your unique perspective on your content niche. But it's very good. That's easy to execute if you're in a very niche market. But if you're in a broad area, right, categories like marketing, how do you find the niche to really shine and hone in?
Well, so content tilt, I mean, that's where the tilt comes from. So if you say, all right, what's my sweet spot? What am I going to tell my stories about? You'll say, okay, what's my expertise area as an individual or organization? And then what's my audience's desire? That's a sweet spot. That's where most people stop. You have to take it to the next level to be successful and go and do something we call the content tilt. That's finding an area of differentiation where you can cut through all that clutter and get attention so you can build an audience. Most organizations don't do a content tilt. They'll say, like, so if somebody's in, to your point, marketing or cloud computing, they'll start creating content that everyone else is creating. And if you're creating content that everyone else is talking about and it's broad content to a broad audience, it's going to be very hard to get attention and to break through. So you're not going to do anything. So you've got to make sure that you niche it down some way. You have to talk about things something differently. So how do you think about that? Well, you could go with audience. So let's say that you sell something for marketing people, but that doesn't mean that's how you're going to market. Maybe you're going to talk about just financial marketing strategy to your core of financial marketers that might buy your product. Oh, great. That I can build maybe a content tilt around something like that. So you want to make sure you bring the audience in, or maybe it's around a topical area. So you're not just going to talk about just financial marketing. You're going to really get niche into findability in financial marketing, and you're going to talk about SEO and SEM, whatever, right? So you have to really take that to the next level, or maybe it's there's no other providers talking about financial content marketing on TikTok. What if we did it on TikTok? So you're going to do it on a completely new channel, and that's how you're going to differentiate yourself. Or maybe there's no one doing an amazing email newsletter or podcast in your industry. So it doesn't matter how you differentiate, but you have to say, how are we going to break through? What's our hook? What's our must-see TV? How are you going to tell your story different in some way? Lots of different ways to do it, as we just talked about. But you can't just say, okay, our target are marketing professionals, so we're going to talk about marketing strategy to marketing professionals. Okay, how many people talk about that? About 1 million. Are you going to break through with them doing it for 5 years and you coming in here? Nope, absolutely not. And I think a lot of people think that if they just put the content out there, it's going to be successful. That's not true. It's just going to sit out there like nothing, and nothing's going to happen, and you're going to lose your job or your business, and it's no fun for anyone.
Yeah, and you mentioned that cloud computing as an example. I think if you think about it, Salesforce and Microsoft and Oracle and all those guys are putting out a ton more content than you about cloud computing. Yep. So if you're being so broad, your chances of ever getting anywhere with that topic is very much slim. So I think the narrow down and going really deeper into a core area and knowing your audience and specializing and writing about it, or creating whatever format of content.
Yeah, what do plant managers on the shop floor need to know about cloud computing? Like, hey, there might be something there, right? I mean, those are the types of things we want to think about. And again, this is marketing. You can sell to a lot of different people, but we're talking about marketing to a certain group of people, building an audience. So instead of doing one broad message to 16 different buyer personas, you're going to probably want to do one to each different buyer persona, so you can be specific enough so you can break through.
Most certainly. And obviously you've mentioned earlier, you've advised enterprises on, content strategy and things that they need to execute. And you mentioned the biggest mistake is they never make a decision or do something with the ideas you've given. Obviously you've been involved, right, in the content marketing space. So from your perspective, what are some of the common mistakes, whether it be entrepreneurs, the content entrepreneurs, or even enterprises making when it comes to developing content strategy?
Sure. Well, the first one is, content tilt. We talked about, they don't have a content tilt. The second one is they don't choose a base. Like, what's the one or two things that they're great at? And immediately you'll see this with every company is they diversify almost immediately. They want to do all the things. They want to be everywhere. So that's not going to happen, because you're going to take all your resources and they're going to be everywhere and you can't be great. Mm-hmm. So those things, a lot of them don't focus on email newsletters. They focus on rented platforms. And then when those platforms change the rules, they're like, okay, that's not going to work. What am I going to do there? And maybe the biggest one, Samuel, is the idea of not delivering consistent content. Mm-hmm. I think you see that a lot on YouTube, and you'll see it a lot with podcasts, where you'll have organizations or individuals where they'll create content when they have something to say. And if you want to be a content entrepreneur, you want to be a media company, you want to be somebody that creates a multi-million-dollar media brand, you're going to have to deliver consistently. So if you have an email newsletter that goes out Friday morning at 7 a.m. every week, you better make sure you deliver that Friday morning at 7 a.m. for the next 3 years, unless you get some information and data that tells you differently. Mm-hmm. That you should be sending it at a different time, or you're going to change the structure because you got audience feedback, whatever the case is. So everything you do, from social media, from podcasts to events to everything, it should always be consistent. And that's what the greatest media companies have done, and content marketing examples have done since the dawn of time.
Most certainly. So obviously, 16, 17 plus years, you've been in this space of content marketing. How has your approach on sales evolved over these years? As the industry kind of adopted this inbound and content marketing framework?
Sure. I mean, I'm a huge believer now in this audience first model. And because I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this, if I was to say what's the best model for launching a business, I would say launch it audience first versus product first. Mm-hmm. Now, I know what I'm saying there, because everyone has a product idea and they want to launch that first, and then you want to put your marketing around that. But What I would like to see, now this takes longer,
Mm-hmm.
but again, you're doing marketing up front where you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to target that audience first, that ultimately I have this product out here in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm going to do is build something that generates interest through an audience first. So that's a blog, a podcast, a YouTube series, whatever. And I'm going to build that audience first so they know, like, and trust us. And then once I get to a point that they know, like, and trust us, then I can monetize that through the product that I had in mind, or better yet, don't have a product in mind and just get to understand your audience better than anyone else. And they will tell you what they will buy. And luckily we did that. I mean, if that hadn't happened for Content Marketing Institute and I was listening to our blog and email subscribers, Content Marketing World would have never existed. Chief Content Officer Magazine would have never existed. So you have to be open to that. The problem is, Samuel, it does take time. I mean, it takes 12 to 18 months. It took us 22 months in the case of Content Marketing Institute to get to a point where we had enough audience that we could monetize. Now you can push that a little bit to lower the time if you have a little bit more promotion dollars, or you've got some really good partners and influencers that can work with you on these. But again, it takes time to build a business, any business. It's going to take 3 to 5 to 7 years, no matter what you do. I would rather do the marketing and build the audience up front. And then that gives me more flexibility and a little bit less risk where I can launch multiple different products and services instead of just focusing on this one. And if this doesn't make it, I'm in trouble. I'd rather not be in that position.
I mean, the funny story is, I don't know if you heard the story of HubSpot. I think HubSpot was blogging almost 2 years before they actually had a product, or while they were kind of building and testing their product, they were already blogging and they were teaching inbound marketing. When they now look at it, right, like the company's massive, market cap. I think their revenue was like $1.2 billion in 2021. And I won't say it's all because of the blogging, but obviously they built an amazing audience that really love and trust their product.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Around and everything around inbound, like we were trying to do it around content marketing. HubSpot did a great job around inbound marketing. They came out with a book, they had the blog, they created the podcast network, and now they've got a huge podcast network and media enterprise. And if you look at that organization, if you didn't know they sold marketing automation products, you'd say they're a media company. Because true. You know what? They are a media company, and we all are a media company. And the difference is whether or not we want to take that seriously or not. HubSpot has, Salesforce has with Dreamforce, that event, COVID aside, before COVID happened, that was $1 billion event with all the stuff going on and all the sponsorship that they sold. Did they sell more Salesforce products? Sure. But in and of itself, that is an amazingly valuable event. They could do all kinds of things with it. So I think sometimes we forget about these things happen. Red Bull Media House is another really good example. You go all the way back to Procter and Gamble and all these cases where you have media mindset. Maybe that's the way to put it. A media type of thinking or publishing thinking. And if you think about that way, that means you're thinking about your audience's needs and you're trying to solve those audience's needs with information first. And if you solve it with information first, then you have the opportunity to solve it with your product and service second.
Yeah. And I think what you said is also the long-term goal too. Like it's not a short-term thing, or if you're trying to build a media and audience and following, that's not done in 3 months or 6 months.
That's right.
So there's
no campaigns. This is a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. And I think when you talked about, HubSpot is a media company, I think they also, I don't know if you know how many certifications and all of that they built, right? They really are expanding way beyond their software as a product. So earlier in the conversation, you mentioned how your wife gave you an ultimatum. You had to take a decision and you said, hey, this is it. I got to do this. So is there any decision-making framework that you follow, especially when you have critical things that you have to take action on?
Well, first, if it's from just a decision standpoint, what your gut tells you is probably right. So you should always keep that in mind. Like how you're feeling about that decision tells you a lot. And usually your first instinct is correct. But in a small organization, you want to make quick decisions. So you want to say, okay, this is how I'm feeling. But then then you want to get your key people involved in that decision as quickly as you can. And listen, just listen and get that feedback. Because if you just said, oh, this is how my gut's telling me, I'm going to go make this decision, you could be making that decision in a bubble, and it might not be the right decision. So if you have some key 3 or 4 people on your operational team, on your executive team that you rely on, that you trust, you want to get them involved in that decision quickly, tell them the feedback you're looking for, listen to them when they give you the feedback, and then see if that aligns with your gut instinct. I always like to make quick decisions, yes or no, either way. We don't want them languishing at all. Like when we want to do something, if it's out there for more than 2 or 3 days, we got a problem. Like why are we hesitating? We probably don't feel good about that decision. It's probably a no. So that tells us a lot by that as well. So make sure you pick up on all these signs as you go. But I think listening is feeling what your gut tell you, and then listen to your staff and make as quick a decision as possible, because there's lots of decisions to make over a long period of time. And the more you anguish over one, you're going to be missing out on some opportunities.
Most certainly. And obviously, as entrepreneurs, we are visionaries. We got always, too many ideas, right? And there's no lack of ideas, but execution is what pays the bills. So what are some practical ways you get things done? Because you've written books and you have to do all these things, right? So what are some things that you do to make sure that you are actually executing on your...
So yeah, I have a goal setting formula that I live by. I have different areas. So my career, financial area, spiritual, philanthropic, mental, physical. I've got 1 or 2 goals that I have for me and for the business set up under each one of those. And I review those every day, so I know what those are. And then that guides me as I go throughout my day, my week, and whatever. So I'm a big believer in that, and have that be thinking about those things throughout the day. And then hopefully I will be very strategic about moving forward with those goals. I'll give you an example. I mean, even though we had a nothing business in 2008, I had that I wanted to sell our business, whatever it was, because we didn't know what the business was going to be at the time. So I said, I want to sell the business for $15 million by 2015. That was my goal. I read that from 2008 all the way on to 15. Now, we didn't sell in 15. We sold in 16. So we accomplished that goal a year later. But I think because I read that goal every day and I looked at it, I made decisions that I would not have normally made because of that. And we're playing the long game here. So what do you want to do? And by the way, those change all the time. You might have a different physical goal. You might have a different mental goal. You want to read different kinds of books and engage, whatever it is. But whatever your goal setting, whether you're a Warren Buffett where you're, pick 5 goals every year and just focus on those 5, or you go to the 6 different areas that I do and pick 1 or 2 underneath, pick a few goals every year that you can accomplish and do everything you can to accomplish those goals.
Yeah, I mean, I think every book you talk about higher performance, right? They talk about visualizing your goal and actually just really reading it every day, which something is I need to practice. I think you have strategic planning, you come up with these big visions, but you look at it every quarter. Like that's not enough to make things happen.
No, I mean, look, in most companies that do strategic planning, even if they do it on a quarterly update basis, then they somebody will create an amazing document and it goes in a drawer. That's why for the content mission statement, when the editorial team comes together, we want to review that mission statement every time we get together, because we say, okay, is this the right audience? You're like, yeah. What type is this the content we're creating? Is it aligned with our missions? That we want to check this stuff and gut check all the time, because especially if the CEO comes in and says, create a piece of content around this. Well, if we're not paying attention to our content mission, we don't know if that's a yes or a no to that piece of content. So you got to same with your strategic planning, same with your personal goals, everything you've got to make sure that you do. I would say daily basis. I would twice a day if you can, at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. Take 1% of your day, 15 minutes, 1% of your day out and focus on your future. I think it's probably worth it.
That's awesome. Awesome advice. So obviously as entrepreneurs, right, we have a lot of demand on us. We have a lot of things to get done, right? And so productivity and time management is a very important part of our ability to get what we need to do. So are there any productivity hacks that Joe follows that our audience can adapt?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a simple one. I use an app called Habitbull. Habitbull.com. You can download it. I think it's for use with Google or Apple, whatever the case is. And I track 6 or 7 things every day that, depending on, I want to lose weight or eat better or read more books or whatever. And those things, those habits align with my goals. So I set my big goals that I review on a regular basis. But of course, I have to do things every day, create habits so that I can achieve those goals. So I use Habitbull to do that and track that. And then it tells me during the day if I'm not reaching my goal or I missed this one, and I can look at it and I can say, oh, I'm 90% on this goal, or I'm 40%. Either I need to do better, or that's not the right goal for me. Like you have to make a decision there. So it's something that I can see every day and keep track of, that either keeps me on track or gets me toward, different goals that I should be focusing on.
Awesome. Well, the last question that I have is, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self?
I always, I always think that, if I had to redo there's some big failures out there. And then I was thinking, well, if I went back and didn't do that, well, maybe the thing wouldn't have happened. So I don't want to change anything. I want to make sure that it's perfect. I guess the only thing that I would say is I'd like to go back to 2007 and tell myself not to be so hard on myself. I don't know how that sounds, but I spent a lot of nights, as most entrepreneurs do, you get some amazing highs and some really low lows. Like you think the world is coming to an end. You're supporting your family and you're letting down your kids or whatever you're doing. I would say don't be so hard on yourself and be patient, because these things take time. I mean, when you look at all the stats about how long it takes to build a business, it takes 3 months or 3 years just to get this thing off the ground for the most part. In 5 years, you start really seeing some success. So this is, I mean, if you're going to do this with your life, and then you have to make some decisions on, up front, we had the ramen noodle and bologna years that my wife calls them, where we cut expenses down so that we could survive. So I'd go back and tell myself not to be so hard on myself, and to reiterate to myself that this is a long game. It is a marathon, and you have to be patient. And because I'll tell you, first off, I want to see success right now, but I know that I have to do certain things every day to get to that point, and it takes some time.
So you're saying all these YouTube videos that I watch of all this overnight success is all made up stories?
I think that's winning the lottery. I mean, when you see, and there's no, by the way, then they happen, right? I mean, I see them in my industry for content creation. You'll see an influencer where they do 1 or 2 videos on YouTube, and then they're super famous, and it, great, it works out for them. But most of them are like Mr. Beast. So look at Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast right now is probably the greatest, most well-known content creator on YouTube. He's multi-millionaire. I don't know if he's a billionaire, but he's making a lot of money. He started creating videos in 2011, and I don't think anybody knew about him for another 5 or 6 years. But he created a video almost every day, consistently working out the bugs, figuring out his craft. That's how most of it happens with building a business. So yes, yeah, if you believe in, a lot of people play the lottery. Somebody always wins the lottery. Very, very tough to do. Most people put in the work, put in the time, do it the right way, successful that way. And it's the ones that make it, even with content creation. If you look at why most people fail in content creation, it's because they stop. They get to 6 to 9 months. They don't see immediate return, and they quit and they do something else. Well, you will have an advantage if you go past that, because you've got less competition.
Most certainly. Hard work and determination. There's no easy quick fix. Well, Joe, I certainly appreciate you sparing this afternoon with me and sharing your advice to our audience. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Had a lot of fun.
Thank you, Joe.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.